So as I mentioned, I want to share some words about Torah before we hear the portion itself. So we're in this section of Torah in which the Israelites have left Egypt, been in the wilderness, received the Ten Commandments, and then, as we tend to be, they are an impatient, stubborn, stiff-necked people. And they can't handle the fact that Moses went away for a little longer than they thought, and they created the golden calf. They had a party. They made sacrifices. Moses comes down a second time, and he shows them. He creates the second set of tablets with God, as I mentioned. And so there are two points that I want to make about the Torah portion. The first is, from a broad perspective, one of the pieces we learn from this Torah portion is that it's not enough to simply have escaped slavery. The people demand that there be something exciting about the future. It wasn't enough. We say Dayenu plenty of times. The truth is, Dayenu doesn't work. It was never enough. It wasn't enough to just be free. They had to actually have something exciting to look forward to. They had to have some life before them. I look at where we are now and how much work we've done to protect ourselves, to not get sick. And I would say the same thing. It's not enough just not to get sick. We want to live healthy lives. So we're in a moment, hopefully, at least we think for this moment, we're in a moment where maybe we get to shift gears from simply protecting ourselves to living healthy, active lives, to going out and embracing the wholeness of the world again. In the same way that the Israelites weren't satisfied having left Egypt behind, they wanted more. I wonder if we're at a point where we get to say, perhaps finally, or perhaps for the 8th time before it's rejected again, I'm ready to live life again. So the first lesson is, it's not enough to have simply protected ourselves. We want to live. Which leads to the second point. So what is it we're looking to do? That's the challenge. That once you leave slavery and you cross the sea and you get out into the world, or the wilderness as it was called in the Torah, the question becomes, do you create a golden calf, or do you do something else? Some of you may have seen, if you're watching the talk shows these days, or if, like me, you get certain news magazines, Harvard professor, there's a Harvard professor who has written a book, From Strength to Strength, Finding Success, Happiness, and Deep Purpose in the Second Half of Life. He warns us that if we fall for the golden calf mentality, we find ourselves happy for a moment, but not satisfied for very long. And in fact, we find ourselves almost addicted to the idea that I want the next new shiny object. He calls it the dissatisfaction problem, and he explains it with an example of 2 kings. The first one we know quite well. Here are his words. It's Arthur Brooks, by the way. I forgot to mention his name. He writes, I remember once seeing LeBron James, the world's greatest basketball player, with a look of abject despair on his face after his Cleveland Cavaliers lost the NBA championship to the Golden State Warriors. All of the world's wealth and accolades were like straw for this man in that moment of loss. The second king, Abd al-Rahman III, the Caliph of Cordova in the 10th century of Spain, he quotes him saying the following. When he was 70 years old, he wrote to his people and he said, I have now reigned above 50 years in victory and peace. I'm beloved by my subjects. I'm dreaded by my enemies. I'm respected by my allies. I have all the riches and honors and power and pleasure that I could have ever asked for. And so I can tell you the payoff. I've counted the number of days in which I had pure and genuine happiness. They amount to 14. Brooks' concern is that we define satisfaction and happiness by the wrong formula. The formula we tend to use, he says, is that satisfaction equates to getting what we want. And so if I just look out into the world and I desire something, and if I get that something, that championship, or the car, or the trip to Hawaii, that perhaps I'll then be satisfied. But his studies have shown that we never are. He calls it stepping on the hedonic treadmill. We become so accustomed to the very short-lived satisfaction when we acquire something new that we just want the next new thing. This is exactly what the golden calf represented. It was shiny and new. It offered immediate gratification in the wilderness. And so the creation of the calf brought people to give up what they had and set off a massive party. So let's talk about what the Torah's response is. The words that Bruce will read tonight. The Torah doesn't give them a different shiny object. The Torah doubles down on what it had already given them. It was nothing new. It wasn't shiny. It was the same tablets that they had already seen. And they become the key to a different type of satisfaction. One that Brooks writes, not referring to the Ten Commandments or the Bible at all. One that uses the right formula. So the formula, he says from his studies, that give you long-lasting satisfaction is as follows. You have to take what you have and divide it by what you want. The secret to satisfaction, he writes, is to manage our wants. And so I ask you now to think about the Torah's response to the golden calf. Moses disappears for 40 days. The people no longer are enslaved, but they're impatient. They focus on what they want. They want a God that they can see. They want something shiny. They want what they have not had under slavery, the ability to get up and dance and party in excess. So they take their gold and they get on the hedonic treadmill. They start making shiny things. And the Torah responds with 2 tablets that I believe can be separated into 2 categories, not the traditional ones. One category, fitting Brooks's formula. Notice what you already have. Commandment 1, I am Adonai, your God. You already have me. Commandment number 2, keep the Sabbath. They're not in order. Keep the Sabbath. In other words, you already have time. Cherish it. And the third of the noticings, honor your parents. They're already in your life. And the second category that I think you can split the rest of the 10 Commandments into. Stop looking at what you don't have. You shall not have any other gods. You shall not murder. In other words, don't take time away from others so that you can have their time. Don't commit adultery or stop looking at someone else's spouse. Do not steal, so stop looking at someone else's stuff. And the last of the 10 Commandments, perhaps all-encompassing, sometimes we call it the one in which, there's 2 more. Do not bear false witness, so stop saying you saw something that you didn't see. And the last that is all-encompassing, sometimes we look at it as a summary of the others. Don't covet anything. Not your neighbor's worker, not your neighbor's animal, not your neighbor's house, not your neighbor, period. Brooks didn't quote the Ten Commandments in his article, and I haven't read his book yet, but I am guessing he didn't quote it in his book. But I wonder if he would have realized that parenthetically he was referring to the document that we've had since the book of Exodus. That his formula for satisfaction, which says, look at what you have already and do your best not to throw it away for what you think others have. I wonder if that formula is, in short, the singular message of the two tablets that the Torah gave to us, not once, but twice, and that we've held on to ever since. And so as Bruce shares these words tonight, I hope that we hear them as we approach a break in this pandemic, a shift that will allow us to move from just dodging danger to pursuing life. And in that pursuit, as we start to wonder how we might do that, I know I, as I already have been, will be tempted. Tempted, as we always have been since biblical times, to pour my energy into short-lived material joys that will depart as quickly as they come. This week, I take to heart the reminder from a Harvard professor, from Moses, from Exodus, that satisfaction in life will be achieved better by valuing and holding on to the time, the people, the values we already have, than by pursuing the objects, the relationships, and the experiences that perhaps we covet. Shabbat Shalom.